I love flames. What about you?
It's great.
Good, good. Hey, Markus, thanks for coming. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Today, Bolt is obviously a very big company. But you know, you and I met many, many years ago, and it was a different story back then. You were 19, you were straight out of high school, and a lot of VCs, including myself, had a problem with a number two strategy, the fact that you were active in what we called non-strategic markets. So a lot of people said no. We also said no, to be fair, many times before we eventually said yes. But to the founders here in the audience, what should you do? How do you keep on fighting when you hear all those no's?
Well, first of all, it's never easy. So I think we faced about 100 rejections from various investors over the first couple of years. But what kept us going was that we thought ourselves we had very high conviction in the plan that made a lot of sense. And specifically, if you break down those arguments, then I think most investors think very superficially. They've heard of a concept called network effects, and then they never really go deep to think what does that actually mean. And network effects massively vary, right? You have some industries that have a global network effect. So let's say Airbnb. Like if you're a customer in Finland, you need to get supply all around the world because people travel all around. But if you're taking the ride-hailing case, if you're in Helsinki, you just need supply in Helsinki. So it's a city-based network effect. And just we, from day one, had a clear understanding that this is an industry where city by city is the right way to think about the business and how to operate. And I think the lesson is every entrepreneur, you need to understand the dynamics of your industry really deeply. And then you got to do a better job than I did about articulating that to the investors, because at least I wasn't able to get that message across for the first couple of years.
So what was the key learning for you? What do you think you should have done differently to convince the VCs?
Well, I like to tell myself that just the world has changed a lot in the last 12 years as well, because when we started, I think the world in general was much smaller, specifically the technology world. So in every category, people were used to just having one winner, and they weren't really accustomed to the fact that there might be a dozen winners in a category that all end up making billions of dollars of revenue and size. And that's what happened in the ride-hailing and food delivery industry by now. I mean, there's a dozen companies out there that do more than €1 billion of revenue. But back then, that was unheard of. So I think most people just thought that it's going to be one winner and there's not going to be any space for anybody else. So I think now is a much easier time for most entrepreneurs.
So the audience is full of entrepreneurs and investors. If you were to say one thing that the investors should have thought differently at the time, what would that be?
One thing I would add, in addition to just thinking really deeply about the industry dynamics and not just blindly applying patterns, is that these emerging markets now are so much greater than what they used to be. So when we started, the conventional wisdom was that the only way to get to $1 billion scale was you had to go to rich Western markets. You had to go to the US and Western Europe. But most people had never ran the math that actually you can build a huge, even $10 billion company just in Central Eastern Europe or the Nordics, not to mention in Africa or in Asia. So I think the world is so much greater now that you can actually go to a specific niche in a specific geo and build a massive business.
So a couple of years ago, you were friendly enough to, or nice enough to come and speak at our 20th anniversary party. And my wife was in the audience listening to you and a couple of others. Mm-hmm. Do you know what she told me afterwards?
No.
Well, she walked up to me and she said, Staffan, you're so stupid. I listened to Markus, and after 2 minutes, I know you should have invested. So, you know, there should be those truth sayers around you constantly. Okay, so you couldn't raise, mm-hmm. and when you raised really small amount. Mm-hmm. So you had to do something different. Mm-hmm. And you once told me something that stuck in my head that I've used in many discussions with entrepreneurs, which was our culture takes millions of decisions for us every day. Tell us about what is that culture, mm-hmm. and how can that help you to sort of move mountains?
Well, there's a lot of talk about product market fit, but I don't think there's enough talk about culture market fit. And what I mean by that is that you need to understand what are the requirements in your category, and you got to design the culture to fit that. So in our case, we understood that it's a very intense category where it's very operational. You got to look at the metrics every single day to be on top of it. So the pickup times are good, the car always gets to you, the pricing is accurate, and so on. So it's a lot of daily operations still. The second constraint we understood was that we have 100 times less capital than our competitors. So the only way to win is not to outspend them, but you have to be 10 times as clever, or 100 times as clever with how you spend your money. So we're really obsessed over how do we get the right people and how do we get them to do very frugal decisions. And so on. So there was a number of factors. And just what I see is that like most founders don't really think about it very deeply. They just think like, hey, this is a kind of culture I like, but they don't really think whether that's actually a culture that fits the specific industry I'm building in. No. And you got to have a different culture, whether you're building rockets or medical devices or you're building B2B SaaS. I mean, you got to figure out what's the right tenets and attributes that work in that sector.
So on culture, I've heard you say that you think remote work is insanity. Tell us more.
So actually, we've always been an in-office culture from the day of inception. And there's practical reasons for it, in the sense that, again, we're on a business where you need to meet drivers face-to-face sometimes. You need to meet restaurants face-to-face. We operate hundreds of thousands of scooters. I mean, I've yet to see you can operate those scooters at a remote distance. You need somebody to go and maintain them and clean them and so on. So it's always been a big part of the culture. And even on the tech side, I've just always believed people are long-term, more productive, and also have better mental health if they actually get to interact with their team, at least regularly, face-to-face. And at some point, I think during COVID, this just drifted, as it did in many companies, where it wasn't a conscious decision. We never allowed people to work from home, but it just became the norm somehow. And then about 2 years ago, I realized it's not working. It's not the culture that's made us great. And it wasn't a decision that went popularly down with every single person out of 3,000. But looking back at it now, it was absolutely the right decision to do, to get people back to the office 3 days a week.
Yeah. So you mentioned health. You know, running a startup is not really healthy, to be honest. You know, you have to work brutally hard. It's intense. It takes forever, and so on. What are your health hacks for people here in the audience?
Well, actually, what I've come to understand over time is that people don't really pay too much attention about their health in most tech companies, and I think specifically about their mental health. And I see so often times that people come and face very critical, complex decisions while they're actually not in the best mental place themselves. They might be stressed out, it might have been a very long day already, maybe they didn't sleep too great the day before, and it ends up costing the company millions because they make just bad decisions. So that is something I've been trying to be as a role model in the company as well, and say that, guys, like if you're not feeling at your sharpest, then maybe you shouldn't be doing the most complex decisions today. Put them in the part of the day when you feel like you're in the best shape you can possibly be, if you want to what's best for the company. And on a practical side, I mean, it means take care of yourself, right? I mean, sleep 8 hours a day or whatever you need, exercise, eat healthy, and maybe don't be on Slack 24/7, which is just going to completely mess up your attention span. So do focused, deliberate work.
How often do you check your key metrics?
Every morning.
Every morning. Is that the only time?
Actually, most of the time, yeah. Because I think it's very easy to get obsessive and be on Slack or whatever and just monitor it all the time. I've understood it's a complete waste after 12 years. So I do a deliberate session every morning for about 20 minutes, check out what's going on, and that's it.
Okay, cool. So things move fast. It's a startup. You've been at it for 12 years. Let's talk about your future plans in a while. But now AI is happening. Mm-hmm. No need to say everyone knows that. How is AI affecting you, and how are you what are you doing in AI?
I'd say that in the short term, it's affecting us very little. I was actually expecting us to see more benefits. The few areas where it's worked really well is the obvious ones. Customer support, we've probably been able to automate about 50 to 60% of the volumes, depending how exactly we measure it. We've seen a big uplift in coding, but arguably, I think on a blended basis, 10-20%, not more than that. Lovable, Cursor, Replit? We use all of them. And again, it depends on the specific use case, right? I think people are very excited when they can see that you can have 100% productivity gain in one small area. But when you actually think about the entire work week of the developer, on average, we more see like a 10 or 20% uplift. which is still good, but I mean, it's not as far as maybe the hype would suggest. And then everywhere else around the company, I think we've seen small gains. Everybody is around 5%, 10% more effective, thanks to all these tools, but we haven't seen a massive transformation yet.
Do you use any of them yourselves?
Every single day. I mean, Granola, ChatGPT, etc.
Any other vibe coding tools? I'm after Lovable, by the way.
Yeah, so I mean, I obviously use them for prototyping every weekend. I mean, I need to understand what's going on at the frontier. Otherwise, I'm just going to be completely out of touch with our developers.
So in addition to AI, there is autonomous and self-driving cars. And I checked that in San Francisco, I think Waymo now has a 25-27% market share. They've announced they're working with Uber. I think Baidu and Lyft have said we're going to do something in Europe. Mm-hmm. What are your plans? Are you behind?
No, I actually think it doesn't even matter who's the first one to launch any of these pilots. I think what matters in every industry is who's going to be the last one, who's going to win. And this is, I think, especially true in the field of robotics and self-driving cars. Because this is not an industry where you want to rush things, get out to the market, and somebody gets killed. We've actually seen our competitors literally do that. Yeah. So I think our strategy has been to be much more careful. We are engaging with everybody out there because we're the natural platform of choice. If anybody wants to bring self-driving cars to the market in Europe, then we're the biggest European platform. They can benefit from 200 million customers across all these countries who want to use that service. We can help them with capital, we can help them with building the physical operations, cleaning, charging, etc. But we want to be very deliberate. We pick the right partners who are safe, reliable, and who can actually scale. And the easy thing in this industry is that pretty much anyone can do an impressive demo for about 20 million bucks. Pretty much any team can start from zero, build a demo that drives around in their city, and it looks very impressive. But going from there to an actually highly reliable service that's viable for robotaxi is a completely different ballgame, and even Tesla isn't close.
Yeah. So reliability, obviously, and safety are key, but I guess cost is also key. And I've ridden Waymo a couple of times, and I have to say I love the experience, but it also feels like a brutally expensive platform. Mm-hmm. Which way do you think is the right way going forward?
Obviously, this is only going to get mass adoption once the pricing comes down. And the good news is that it's clearly going to come down. So when you look at the cost curves of these companies, today we're in the order of magnitude of 4 to 5 euros per kilometer. It's going to start picking up in adoption once it gets to a rate of about 3 euros per kilometer. And then mass adoption is about 1 euro per kilometer or less. And this is going to be a 5-10 year game for us to get there as physical manufacturing ramps up, as the software becomes more reliable. But very clearly you can see where this is heading.
And how do you think this will differ from the different markets you're in? You're in some markets where the driver cost is high, I guess, and you're in some where the driver cost is low. Is this going to affect, or is it going to happen everywhere?
Absolutely. And obviously, when we look at some of our markets, like in Africa, Bolt is number one there. We do millions of rides a day, but the average fare is about 25-30 cents per kilometer. When is self-driving going to be competitive with that, even if they can operate in that environment? That's going to be at the very end of the curve. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't generate hundreds of billions of value in the meantime by starting from the richest cities in the world and then working your way down.
Yeah, yeah. So in some of the richest cities in the world, or some of the richest cities in the world happen to be in Europe. Mm-hmm. And in Europe, we talk a lot about regulation. And in the crowd here, I hope that we, in addition to entrepreneurs and investors, have a couple of policymakers. What does Europe need to do in this area?
Well, first of all, I think Europe can't afford to miss this wave. And it's very unfortunate how we have effectively missed out on the electric car transition. It's just sad to see how much of the technology has been invented originally in Europe, like lithium-ion batteries and so on, but then we've completely missed out on it, and now the OEM industry is getting crushed by Tesla and the Chinese. And the sad thing is that I don't think we've taken our lessons from that. Everybody's looking back at the last generation. Everybody's focused on how do we catch up on the electric cars. But what they're missing is that the next decade is going to be about self-driving cars. And we must admit, the European Union has 0 self-driving car companies who are anywhere close in terms of capabilities. And I think we need to wake up and start to invest in that, seriously, because otherwise we're at a massive risk of losing one of the most important industries that make up 10% of the European GDP.
Which is the best country in Europe to have self-driving cars? And it can't be Estonia.
Well, it is actually Estonia, I think, from a point of view of politicians really want to adopt technology there, and it's easy. But actually, if you think about it, like what is truly a good market from a business point of view, then clearly Estonia isn't the wealthiest city in the world, and
it's not the biggest either.
And it's not the biggest either. So I think clearly there are cities that have more population, higher driver labor costs, and it makes more sense to start there.
Okay. So let's talk about Tallinn. Many years ago, we had dinner in Tallinn, and you, by chance, it came up that one of your side interests is to play chess. And someone even mentioned that you were going to play a Norwegian dude in chess. And I later found out that this Norwegian dude was the grandmaster of all chess player, Magnus Carlsen. And I think you played him. How did that come about?
I've actually been interested in chess for 25 years by now. Started playing as a kid with my dad, as many do. But then I think it's really been a great way for me to take my mind off things. So it's something I do often at the end of a workday for half an hour, play some chess online, polish my skills. And then my friends just somehow found this opportunity that, hey, maybe you want to go to Norway and play against Magnus. He's also a big tech enthusiast, and maybe you guys have something to talk about. So obviously I took the chance.
Yeah. And when I first heard about this, I thought, okay, but Markus is going to play this guy, and there's going to be 12 or 15 people in a big circle, and Magnus is going to move around. Is that how it happened, or?
No, it wasn't a simultan, so we just played 1-1.
Okay. How did it go?
Well, I didn't win, but I didn't think I was going in there to optimize for that. I was just thinking that I have to do better than Bill Gates.
Okay. So I heard that you lasted quite a number of rounds. More than 50?
More than 50 moves.
How many?
52.
Okay. So how many rounds did Bill Gates last?
I think less than 10.
Wow.
Which is a miracle by itself.
All right. I won't play in chess, I promise that. So, but on chess, how does it help you to be a better entrepreneur?
Well, partially, thinking clearly, structured, long-term, obviously has some benefits, but I think it's such a constrained environment, and that's not usually what makes business hard. I mean, in business, the hard thing is the ambiguity. You don't really have perfect information, and obviously, after a while, it becomes very stressful. In chess, you don't usually feel that stress, and everything is perfectly clear what's happening.
Good. So I think the headline, or at least sort of the briefing of this talk, is that you're only 1% done, right? But if you think about it, Bolt is, I think, roughly 10 billion euros of GMV.
Yes.
And you're only 1% done?
Yes.
Tell us what's happening, what's coming?
So I'm a numbers guy, so I don't make these claims without actually, first of all, figuring out is that realistic or not. And very simply, we do about 10 billion euros of volume on the platform at the moment, growing at a fast clip, and we have tens of millions of people using us regularly. But when you think about the big opportunity, then in Europe alone, people spend about 1.5 trillion euros a year on their private transportation, and most of that goes to their private car. So we're not even 1% done within that. And obviously, the way to get there is that you need to make the service so compelling that people will want to use shared mobility rather than the private car. And there's not going to be any one product that's going to do that. We need to serve everything from bikes and scooters all the way to self-driving cars, which one day are going to be cheaper than using your own car. And that's where the math comes from.
So you don't have a driver's license. We heard that in the intro. Why? Why, first of all?
I'm very pragmatic about it. I walk to the office every day. I cycle. I use Bolt products. There's no need for me to take on the hassle of getting a license, buying a car, maintaining it, parking it somewhere, and so on. So I just see it as a waste of time and money. And then, funny enough, I made a bet with some of my friends about 5 years ago that am I first going to get a driver's license, or we're first going to get a self-driving car on the Bolt platform? And I think time is running out.
I thought you would have bet on, would you first get married or first get a driver's license? Okay, so, I mean, Bolt has been around for 11, 12 years. You know, it's not yesterday. You've been at it for some time. And most tech companies, or actually most companies, they get disrupted at one point in time. Right? You know, we see it all the time. It's actually what we thrive on as investors. How will you make sure that Bolt doesn't get disrupted?
When you study the history of technology companies and you look at what are the patterns, which ones got disrupted, which didn't, I think oftentimes it just comes back to the culture of the team and the founders, because these transitions are never easy, right? I think it's very much the lower risk scenario short term to not take these bold bets and just optimize the business you have. You're going to be making more profits each year. In the short term, you're going to maybe have slightly better growth. But then one day, this new revolutionary technology comes about and your business gets wiped out. And for us, very clearly, that's self-driving cars. And I think if we weren't the founder-run company, I think it would be very hard for us to justify taking some of our best people, taking a lot of capital, tens and hundreds of millions, and deploying it into this new area, which is still risky, to be clear. And actually, when we look at our public peers, many of them are struggling with it. I don't think they oftentimes have the support of all the shareholders to do these risky bets. So it starts off from the top.
Yeah. So you have a culture that is very cost conscious. You know, you turn every dime. At one point in time, you had half the overhead versus Uber on a GMV basis, etc. But in that culture of not having any slack anywhere, how do you make sure you have that either cost slack or mental slack, etc., to be innovative and not just grind it, you know, do the daily grind?
I think actually those things don't run at conflict at all, in the sense that you have to be cutting waste, I think, all across the board. And that means that universally applies whether you're working in operations or in technology. I think we should just be eliminating waste where people spend time on stuff they shouldn't, or they do low-value tasks. So that's something we're ruthless about. But at the same time, you do got to admit, you do got to experiment. And experimenting is not a bad thing. That's the only way to innovate and find novel solutions. So we're just being very explicit that we're pro-experimentation, but we're anti-waste. And I think that's a balance we need to explain well to people.
Got it. If you look back at these 10 plus years, how much is luck? How much is skill? And the reason I ask is I listened to you once where you said there's some instances where you've just been super lucky. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how many Swedes there are in the room, but we have this very famous skier who won the most World Cups ever. I think he won like 86 World Cups or so. And he was a very quiet guy, and he was interviewed once on TV where the guy who interviewed him said, you know, Ingmar, today, you won by 3.5 seconds. You know, you have to admit, weren't you a bit lucky today? And the guy comes from the north, is very quiet, doesn't say much. He's quiet for a couple of seconds, and then he says, you know, Sven, it's funny, but the more I train, the luckier I am. Luck and skill, what's your view?
I'd even say it's not necessarily about skill, but I think it's about just tenacity and relentlessness. So you just don't give up. And what I see is that the people who are not lucky are the ones who never try. So in my mind, there's been 100 chances where the company could have gone bust if we had given up, but we always just kept on going. And then, you know, it might seem tough, but then after a while, you start getting these lucky opportunities just because you're still there and you're still pursuing them every day. And I think that makes the difference between the winning teams and the teams that go out of business.
Yeah. And hey, again, Markus has been at it for 10 years. You're 1% done. You're a $10 billion company. We're a very happy investor. before we quit, I think we should give Markus, the chess player, a big round of applause. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you. So.